and fascinating presentation. And I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Sergey Kravtsov from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Israel. Dr. Kravtsov, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me and presenting me. I would like to share the screen. Could I? Not yet. Would I? May I share my screen?
Yeah, 1 minute. You can try now.
Okay. So, you can see the title of my lecture, and I'll start immediately the content. Palestinian style is a term coined in 1931 by a Lviv Zionist newspaper, Hvila, for a new synagogue in Brozhnevo Sada, now in Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast. The term refers to a distinctive phenomenon in interwar architectural theory, recognizable expression, and political processes linking the British Mandate Palestine and Jewish communities in the so-called Eastern Lesser Poland. The Palestinian style is exemplified by the burial compound in the new Jewish cemetery of Ivano-Frankivsk, Stanislavov, designed by Josef Avin in 1927-1931, and the synagogue in Brozhnevo Sada, built by Adam Appenzeller in 1931. My paper briefs the history of these hitherto little-known buildings, the architects' biographies, and the frames in which these works may be contextualized. The need for a new Jewish cemetery in Stanislavov emerged in the 1920s, when the old one, known from 1692, could no longer satisfy the community. At the communal elections of 1924, 55% of the Jewish voters put their faith in the Zionist parties. The elected community council re-established the bathhouse and the slaughterhouse and purchased a plot for a new cemetery to be dedicated in 1925. After the 1928 communal elections, the Zionist representation shrank to 40%, while a Zionist, the lawyer Dr. Anselm Halperin, was elected to the head of the community. Under his leadership, a new wing of the Jewish hospital was built, the communal building was refurbished, and the new cemetery was fenced, and the masonry grade synagogue was renovated. The representative Jewish edifices of Stanislavov dated to the 18th and the 19th centuries. Most visible were the late Baroque Great Synagogue and the Progressive Temple. The latter was designed in an Orientalizing style by Wilhelm Stiasny and erected in 1894-95. The old synagogue matched the urban surroundings, while the temple expressed a proud Jewish otherness. The buildings of the new Jewish cemetery were removed from the city center and contrasted with the synagogue's styles. The community commissioned burial buildings from Josef Avin. Born in 1883, he studied at the Lviv Polytechnics and Technical University in Vienna and graduated from the Technical University of Munich. By 1927, when he started his project for the Stanislavov Cemetery, Avin was already a successful architect, participant in many competitions, researcher and promoter of Jewish art, and a theoretician, conservator, and protector of Jewish architecture. I should mention that the Commission for Protection of Jewish Monuments mentioned by Samuel Gruber was actually initiated by Avin. Avin presented his design at the exhibition which the Society of the Arts Friends held in Lviv in May-June 1927, jointly with the artists Leon Vychulkovsky, Ivan Trush, Yanina Reichert, and Antony Bartkovsky. The 21 Avin's exhibits included 5 dedicated to the new cemetery, a model and a view of the site, a perspective of the ceremonial hall, and drawings of the entrance gate and the auxiliary building. All these are probably lost. The exhibition reviewer Artur Lauterbach wrote, "The works by Avin are the fruit of almost 20 years of conscious effort for individual style and expression. The architect's strength is evident." Sorry, I have to, sorry, I moved. The architect's strength is evident in striving for an independent form. Avin arrives at the so-called Dutch style, probably the style, currently dominant in construction via a different path. He doesn't uncritically accept the new slogans of the West. He delves into the problem of old synagogue construction to draw from it a thoroughly modern consequence. First, he would like to draw your attention to the fashionable yet full of individual expression way of composition, struggling for the horizontal line and almost painterly temperament in the distribution of masses. As appears from Avin's business logo from 1925, he proposed a choice of styles between National Romanticism and Modernism. The former style refers supposedly Avin's 1920 design, Betolam, for the new Jewish cemetery in Krakow, and his 1922 design for the grave of Yitzhak Leibush Peretz. Avin's work on the sanatorium for Jewish students in Vorokhta demonstrated his shift from the contextual Zakopane style to modernism around 1927. Avin expressed his interest in Jewish architecture in Palestine in his 1908 design for the Hebrew Gymnasium in Jaffa. In 1923, he won the third prize in the competition for the Hebrew Gymnasium in Jerusalem. The next year, he visited Palestine and met with Richard Kaufman, the head of the local architects union, and then took part in the competition for the farming school in Naalal. In 1927, Avin contemplated the emerging Jewish architecture in Palestine. He based his thought on the German theory of organic rootedness. He advocated for the flat roofs promoted by Bauhaus for their modern aesthetic and rejected by the German conservators as, quote, a recognizable child of other skies and other blood, unquote. Avin hailed a flat roof as a traditional one appropriate in the land of Israel. A house without a sloping roof remains the folk shape of buildings in Eretz Israel until today. This tradition is very old, and its origins are traceable to the biblical times. This tradition may be proved by a specific law that demanded the construction of a parapet to prevent accidents, Deuteronomy 22:8. The flat roof of the Orient has practical uses. One part serves to dry fruits, and another is for resting during wonderful and fresh summer nights. A house without a sloping roof certainly is a local motive. Avin proposed a concept for the Jewish architectural style in Palestine, quote, if we will take as a starting point a building mass without a sloping roof, adjust the proportions of the dynamically divided walls and symmetrically order the built masses, and considering the climatic demands, adjust the windows and doors, then we will receive a shape appropriate to our motherland and capable of architectural development. Two photographs published in Chvila's supplement show the ceremonial hall in Stanislavov. It is an asymmetric structure with dynamically assembled masses and large spans of plain walls. A tall upper part of the horizontally terminated walls suggests that it includes a parapet. The walls are pierced by narrow windows, as if designed to protect from southern sunlight. The pointed portals express grief apt for the funerary architecture. The entrance gate visually alludes to a horned altar a motif known from archaeology and popular in Jewish architecture of the early 20th century. The new cemetery served as an extermination camp, extermination site during the Holocaust. The Soviet Extraordinary Commission for Investigation of the Nazi Crimes established that about 100,000 people were killed there with bullets and buried in 45 pits, including 35 mass graves. A photo of the Commission's work in November 1944 depicts the devastated cemetery, although the ceremonial building looks undamaged. It was razed later under the Soviet rule. Jewish burials were continued there until 1967, when the Soviets closed the cemetery. There are about 500 graves, a reconstructed ohel of Rabbi Chaim Hager of Otenia, and several memorials. A substantial part of the territory became a residential area. The second edifice under the discussion is a synagogue in Broshnev Osada. This settlement emerged in the 1880s for timber industry workers, most of whom resettled from elsewhere. The name Osada means a colony. In 1939, its population comprised 1380 Poles, 300 Ukrainians, 240 Jews, and 60 Germans. According to the Memorial Book of 1974, the Jewish community had a wooden synagogue, which burned in 1931, and a temporary barrack was built for prayer. The community's desire to build a new synagogue was supported by the J.P. Glesinger Company administration, which reached out for an architect. The key participants of the synagogue construction were Glesinger's managers and employees. The memorial states the synagogue was indeed a superb building, which would not have been put to shame by contemporary beautiful synagogues. He, however, is only partially correct, saying that an architect from Tel Aviv who drew a plan for the new synagogue was considering the style of Israel. In February 1932, Chvila's supplement published a photograph of the synagogue defined its style as Palestinian and named Adam Appenzeller its architect. The 1974 Memorial Book translated the redundant, in its opinion, term into the style of Israel. Another inaccuracy refers to the architect's whereabouts. Adam Adolf Adash Appenzeller was born in Galicia to Hermann or Zvi Hirsch Appenzeller, a turf merchant in Dolina, and Hanna Blumenthal from Bolechiv on April 16, 1901. The family shared Zionist ideas. Adam's elder sister, Miriam, settled in Palestine in 1907, married Isaac Isidore Mamlok, a pharmacist, and was among the founders of Givatayim. Hermann Appenzeller moved to Lviv, where his son, then named Adolf Blumenthal, enrolled at secondary technical school in 1911. Hermann financed his son's studies in Vienna and Oldenburg, then in Weimar Republic. In 1931, Adam received the engineer's diploma from the Oldenburg Municipal Engineering Academy, renamed Hindenburg Polytechnic in 1927. His letters in the National Library of Israel show that he spent most of 1931 and 32 with his parents in Lviv. Adam was depressed by the economic crisis, torn between the desire to unite with his Viennese fiancée, his work, and his plans to leave for Palestine. In his letter of April 22, 1931, he writes that the synagogue's construction in Broshnev Osada will start in May, and on May 4, he reports postponing the works for 1 week. Thus, the synagogue was built between May 1931 and February 1932, when its photograph appeared in the press. Appenzeller arrived in Palestine with a steamship Carnaro on December 26, 1932. Appenzeller's file at the Central Zionist Archives holds 2 unsigned sketches of a synagogue. This may be attributed to the Broshnevo-Sade synagogue, since the western facade corresponds to the pre-war photograph taken from the northwest and showing 6 elliptic-headed windows of the upper register, 4 rectangular windows on the lower one, and the central door piercing the plain wall. The cross-section depicts the placement of the Torah ark between 2 of the 6 tall windows on the eastern wall. The parapet, a generic Palestinian element, hides a sunken, low-pitched roof. The prayer hall's eastern wall is longer than its northern wall, probably in contrast to the typically long-voiced progressive synagogues. The synagogue has a northern lobby with a parapet hiding the roof. The prayer hall was probably attended directly from the outside in summertime and via the lobby during cold seasons. Appenzeller's file contains a paperclip with his work published in 1932. Another paperclip presumably shows his source of inspiration. The new ceremonial hall at the Venice Jewish Cemetery, built by Ignaz Reiser in 1926-28. This design, in turn, was inspired by the Venice crematorium in Simmering, a 1922-23 work by architect Clemens Holzmeister. This expressionist design alluded to the Far and Near Eastern cultures that practiced the cremation of the dead. Most probably, these vague Oriental connotations, already employed in Vienna for a Jewish object, and some measured exoticism answered Appenzeller's and Avin's concepts of Palestinian architecture imported to the Galician soil. A little doubt remains about the correlation of both architects' intentions and especially the term Palestinian style, insofar as Hvila highly respected Avin as an architect and theorist, and both architects lived in Lviv in 1931-32 and could control the editor's wording. This style correlates with that of the synagogues erected in Zionist-oriented communities in Palestine, for instance, in Afula and Netanya during the same period. Appenzeller's activity continued in Palestine. He worked for Austin Harrison, the British mandatory government's chief architect. In 1932, he opened his bureau in Tel Aviv. He advertised his services in Hvila and prepared modernist projects for Lviv. His father arrived in Haifa in February 1934. Around 1936, Herman transferred his bank account from Lviv to Tel Aviv and indicated his address as the Appenzeller House, built by his son at 96 Allenby Road, presently 12 Simchat Beit HaShoeva. It is a modernist building, presently a landmark. Herman was buried in Tel Aviv in 1963. Adam was buried in Holon in 1986. The synagogue building in Broshnevo-Sada survived the Holocaust. In 1954, the Council for Religious Cults in Stanislavov Oblast designated it for a workers' club of Rozhnetiv mechanical workshop, and later it was converted into a store. Subsequently, it was reconstructed into the so-called Carpathian style. Its narrow elliptic-headed windows became broad and rectangular. Its low-pitched roof became steep, and it was supplemented with a triangular dormers. Partitions split the interior, and it became a two-story building. Thus, the Palestinian expression gave way to the Ukrainian regional one. The Palestinian-styled projects by Avin and Appenzeller may be viewed from several perspectives. They manifested the architect's support and pride in the Zionist project and its promotion in Eastern Lesser Poland. As such, these projects may be included in the colonial discourse. According to this approach, the Zionist circles in 1930s mandatory Palestine advanced a progressive, westernized architectural agenda, one that was both in line with the segregationist colonial politics of the Jewish settlement and the turn away from the 1910s and 1920s pursuits to found a local Oriental style through a study of building typologies and climate, unquote. It is evident, however, that this stylistic turn promoted by Avin was inclusive regarding the Arabic tradition and saw it as a guardian of ancient Jewish building law. Avin overturned the German Heimatschutz speculations against the ruthless modernist architecture as a Semitic by using the same arguments of organic rootedness. Both discussed projects belong to the Jewish art and identity discourse. From the 19th century, the history of Jewish architecture traces the visual means and historical references oscillating between loyalty to the host society and self-identification. The shortly living Palestinian style was coined as a style rooted in and tailored for the land of Israel. It also referred to Viennese expressionism and was applicable in Poland, now West Ukraine, as a token of Jewish pride and support for the Zionist idea. The two discussed projects also belong to the Holocaust discourse, insofar as the burial compound in Ivano-Frankivsk was razed, its architect killed in Yanovska road camp, and the synagogue in Broshneva Sada lost its Jewish community and architectural expression. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kravtsov, for your presentation. And I'm sure that our participants have a lot of questions or comments or remarks, but we will keep them till the after all the presentations are done. So I would like to invite now our next presenter, Dr. Anna Berezin from Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So, yeah,
thank you, Nadia.
Yeah, please.
Do you see my screen shared?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So then, first, I would like to thank Professor Evgeny Kotlev, who invited me to speak at this conference. It's a real pleasure to be back to normality, even if it's on Zoom. I just hope that next year, if not in Jerusalem, but still in a safer world there, we could speak to each other in person, not on Zoom. And my topic today is Synagogue textiles in Ukraine in the long 19th century. And I find this topic quite a paradox for the simple reason that 19th century, early 20th century, periods of abundance, if we speak about synagogue textiles, at least in number. There was in Europe, there were so many artisans and manufacturers and companies that made synagogue textiles. And these textiles were in many cases also uniformed in style, in design. And so we have for example, in Austro-Hungary, we have in many cases hundreds and hundreds of curtains or toromantals that would be very similar in design, so kind of easy to research. But if we speak about the same period in Ukraine, it would be quite a different situation. It is so hard to find objects from this period or archival photographs, so it's a quest. And today I would like to show some results of this quest. and discuss them with you. First of all, of course, the best collection of synagogue textiles is in the Greek Museum of Iconography and Craft, and it was the collection was examined in detail by Professor Berezin, and the results were published. So the collection has objects from the 17th century and 18th century, and some from 19th that I brought here as an illustration to the trend that was described by Professor Yaniv, that in East European Ashkenazi communities, we see this fashion to use embroidered fabrics or patterned fabrics, many cases second-hand use of these fabrics, to combine them together to add inscriptions. So very little presence of iconography, of iconographical elements. And we see that this trend actually persisted through the 19th century and 20th century. If you look through the books about synagogues in Poland, in Lithuania, in Ukraine, we would see that images of Torah arcs, there you can clearly see Torah arc curtains. So I found about 100 images of that kind. And 80% of what you see is usually still this fabrics of floral design. Sometimes Magen David is attached, but 20% of these images do show curtains or bundles with iconography. And so here is exactly back to our quest. So what if there is iconography? What would it be? And so as an answer comes the first image. It's in low resolution, unfortunately, but still we can see Torah curtains in Bach Synagogue in Medjugorje. And though details are not very clear, but you can see very many iconographical elements in one piece. So the tablets of the law and flanking lines in the central part, menorah and two columns in the bottom part, a priestly blessing, crown, birds, probably double-headed eagle in the upper part. So kind of symbols or elements that you would know, but a lot of them in one piece. And another photograph was made by Solomon Yudovin during the Anski expedition. Unfortunately, the name of the synagogue or the place where this photograph was taken is not identified, but still we can see the same approach, let's say, or the same idea that you have a piece of fabric with lots of things in. That's tablets of the law, lines, double-headed eagle, priestly blessing, crowns, and they also have some scenes in the bottom part, and we will come back to this scenes because we will see several in the second part of my presentation. Now we will come to discuss the question if we have any physical objects of that type. And actually we have. For example, this one is from Museum of Historical Treasures of Ukraine. But the moment we start to discuss physical objects, we should have in mind this uncertainty connected to the provenance. We do have this object in the museum in Kiev, but the collections, the objects were moved during the interwar period in Soviet Union, so we don't know if it was produced in Ukraine or even was used in Ukrainian synagogue. But let's say we have some hope it was, but we do have more objects with much more clear Ukrainian provenance. This one is kept in the State Museum of History of Religions in St. Petersburg, and it was brought from Berezin in 1930s. So in here, one more time, it's not the Torah arc valance is identical, but the Torah arc curtain is not, but it's still similar. The same division, and so for example, this upper part is crown and curtain and tassels is very clearly the same, but the middle part are variations. But we have actually more objects. One of them from the Museum of Jewish History in Moscow, dated 1915. So it was done during the First World War and dedicated to someone who was killed during the war. And one more similar object in the local history museum in Alexandrovka, so central Ukraine. It's in very bad condition, and it's not clear if some parts of decoration just if it was not finished, if some parts of the decoration were not preserved, but that's what we have. So like 5 objects of similar design already make a trend, I believe. So the way I spoke about these hundreds and hundreds of objects that we can see in, for example, Austro-Hungary of the same or similar design, this is probably the case when we can speak about some very fashion design that also persisted for many years. The earliest dated object is 1888, the latest 1915. It's almost 4 decades. And as we learned from the research Professor Yaniv, there is also a connection between decoration of curtains and Torah mantles. And indeed, we have also found in mantles of very similar design. And just kind of to summarize this first part, so in contrast to what we saw in Lviv and what we see in these images published in by Marie and Kazimierz Pichotka in their books, there were not only curtains and mantles that were made of some patterned fabrics, but there were textiles with iconographical elements. And it seems that there were some fashionable design or uniform design that were used by different artists during a long period of time. And also, I think that we can speak about influences or some interplay between decoration of Torah art in Eastern Europe and these pieces of textiles. Like we can find some very similar combinations as we speak about like of symbols, as we speak about details, but just in general, for example, one of the most known graphical motifs on Torah art in Eastern Europe is 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. So just an example from Ukrainian Synagogue and the Torah arc that has these 3 crowns. All the curtains that we saw, if we see Torah arc valance, like the upper part, and Torah arc curtain as one set, then they have 3 crowns altogether on vertical axis, exactly the same way as the Torah arc had it. And in all the examples we saw, they were not inscribed, so it's not written what crown is what. It's here in this case we can identify only the crown of priesthood by means of 2 hands. But we have other examples of curtains that have such identification. So this curtain we haven't seen yet. It was on display in Museum of Jewish Culture in Odessa. And one more time, so this question of provenance, it was on display in Odessa, but don't know was it produced in Ukraine, but most certainly it was used in Ukrainian synagogues. We actually have one more image from the same museum. It shows very, not identical, but very similar Torah arc curtain. And in 2 cases, we have these 3 crowns identified. So we will not speak about their order, but I think in general, we can say that the decoration of Torah Ark was a great influence on decoration of this Torah Ark curtain. And the last thing is this scene in the bottom that meanwhile found on 4 objects. All of them have Akedah, sacrifice of Isaac, binding of Isaac in them, but they also have some additional elements. So let's just speak about this curtain from Berezin. I find it really striking how this is almost abstract. Kind of we know this idea of no human figures while showing biblical saints, for example, in Chernivtsi, in Novoselica, we saw this approach in wall paintings, though they were done later. But still, here we can see the mountain of Moriah shown as a semicircle and altar shown as a geometrical figure. I think it's even more kind of strict in its approach than the wall painting. And other 4 cases have actually other elements. And these I find truly unique. Meanwhile, I didn't find any parallels in curtains in other places that discuss, probably you know some. So here in all 4 cases, you have Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac. It's also inscribed, so it's written. But you have this building and massive building, and it's also inscribed, written there, Oil Abraham, the tent of Abraham. And here, so we have this tent of Abraham mentioned in Genesis 18, so the scene of 3 angels coming to Abraham, hospitality of Abraham. And but the thing is, if you search for illustrations in Hebrew books about hospitality of Abraham, you would find tents. It's not buildings. And here, that's an interesting question: how it changed to massive building, and probably it's somehow connected to this to Eshel Abraham, to another. In Genesis 21, we have Abraham planting a tree. So Mata Eshel. So it's in Hebrew, and we know that something like the sages had a discussion about this word Eshel. So it was understood as the tree by some sages, but it was understood as the place to get guests in other cases. And actually, you can see this building in much more detail. And probably, so this Oil Abraham and Eshel Abraham, the tent of Abraham and inn of Abraham are shown as one. And we do have more examples in Ukrainian realm that show this tent of Abraham or inn of Abraham as mass building and not a tent. So one example is Jewish cemetery, New Jewish cemetery in Brode. And more examples one more time, so Chernivtsi and Novoselica. And here, just pay attention that we have, so it's the hospitality of Abraham shown, the angels and birds, the table, a tent. But in the background, you, in both cases, see this massive building, which is probably refers to Eshel Abraham, so in Abraham. But here I have more questions than answers. And one more thing, so we have this 3 cases of Akedat Yitzchak and sacrifice of Isaac, and Isaac and Abraham presented together. And also we have one more case, then we have also Jacob inside in this bottom curtain from Jewish Museum in Odessa. It also shows Jacob's flock. And one more time, it brings us back to the decorations in synagogue. They were made later, but still in the same series. We have like patriarch presented in one place on one wall. So somehow the curtain also had this with 3 patriarchs shown on Torah curtains. And just to make all this long story short, so in spite of this very trouble to find objects to examine, I still think that even those few that I found show some trends that we didn't know before. There's abundance of iconographical elements in one piece, and I believe that this abundance is actually influence of the design that we know from art. And I'm not saying that it's specific or somehow to Ukraine only, because we see this a lot of elements in one piece also in Lithuania and Belarus. And we do have clear identifications of connections to the decoration of Torah art. And the last thing is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob shown together by symbols or presented as symbols. Here, I still have more questions. This is probably regional development, but I didn't find any Lithuanian Belarusian objects showing the same, but it's just too few objects to make kind of big proclamations. But so I find this Ukrainian synagogue textiles of this late period as wonderful subject to research, and I would be happy to discuss it in one session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anna Berezin, for your presentation. It's really fascinating how you could find those traces among different objects, and yeah, really thank you. But we will have to wait till after all the presentations are done. So be patient, all the presentators and the participants, for your chance to ask questions. And I would like to invite our next presenter, Miss Elena Solomon from the Bar-Ilan, now it's Berlin University from Israel. So I think, yeah, if you need a presentation. Yep.
Yes, I'm sharing my screen 1 second. Okay.
Yes.
So can you see my notes? Can anyone see my notes?
If we can see your speaker notes. Yeah, it's okay.
No, let me just try it one more time.
Yes.
Okay. There's a delay. Hold on. Okay, now you don't see them, correct?
No.
Okay. So the topic of my presentation today is Shpanyer Arbet, the Ashkenazi metallic leaf. During this presentation, I will first explain about the technique and then go over the origin myth and historical usage. And finally, I will offer a perspective on contemporary usage based on original research. Much has already been written on Shpanyer Arbet, including by 2 scholars presenting at this conference, Bracha Yaniv and Batsheva Goldman Aida. I utilize each of their research as part of my own, and I'm happy that we are all here at the same conference. Also, as this technique is thoroughly of the diaspora and used and named by Yiddish speakers, I will be using Yiddish pronunciations for terms both Yiddish and Hebrew in my presentation. In order to give you a stronger sense of the craft and as a nod to our shared love for Ukrainian Jewish heritage, I have incorporated images of items compiled in Esther Yuhaz's essay on Shpanyer Arbet in Treasures of Jewish Galicia, a catalog of the exhibition of Judaica from the Museum of Ethnography and Crafts in Lviv, Ukraine, held in Tel Aviv in 1994. This talus that you see here is located currently at the Israel Museum, and it's a great example of where the atura of the Shpanyer Arbet is placed and how it looks like attached to the talus, instead of separated from the garment, as we will mostly be seeing it in this presentation. So what is Shpanyer Arbet? A Shpanyer Arbet is a metallic lace considered exclusive to the Ashkenazi Jewish community and now practiced by only a handful of artisans. The technique uses bobbins to wind and cross metal threads around 4 or more passive cords. The final ornate swatch is removed from the loom on which it is constructed and sewn onto a garment as embellishment, most commonly onto talisim and historically also kippot, sterntichos, which are head coverings, and bodice pieces known as brustuches. Shpanyer Arbet is made by working 3 fibers, 2 thin silver wires and 1 silver plate around a set of inner core threads, typically cotton or polyester, and then 2 outer thinner metallic threads. And I will point them out to you. So these ones here are the inner thicker ones made of cotton or polyester, and the outer ones here are the thin metallic ones. The 3 working fibers, which, and this is the video, so I'll play a tiny bit of it, are held here in the wooden shuttle. Okay, so in the image, there are 4 core threads, all of which are passive, and the 3 active metal threads, which are attached to the wooden shuttles, are then secured to the paper pattern beneath and pillow beneath with pins on a rotating drum. The passive fibers then feed through hooks at the top of the frame with their bobbins hanging down behind the table to create upward tension. So I'll show you here, the bobbins hang down from these 4 hooks up at the top of the frame, and the bobbins hang down with the passive threads to create a suspended tension, which is very unique. Okay, so the video here shows how the threads are wound around each other. It features Rabbi Grunwald, who's one of the few remaining craftsmen in the world. And I was not able to reach him before this presentation, so I don't have consent to use his face or his voice, so it will be a silent video. However, the visual is still quite enthralling given the utter lack of internet presence that this technique has. So I hope that you can see it without too much delay. So what he's doing now is he's winding the shuttles around the inner passive threads. And so he winds it around and then he goes back around the outer thin wire and now the cotton. And then back around the metal. And then he kind of winds them around each other. And if we wait just an extra second. So now he pins it onto the paper in the shape of the pattern that he wants. Okay. So the origin story. A unique aspect to Shpanyer Arbet is its accompanying origin story, which is unusual for a craft technique. The commonly told myth centers on a man named Mordechai Leib Margulis, who grew up in Berezin. As a youth, in order to escape conscription into the Russian army by the Choppers or the kidnappers, he escaped, hidden within a wooden cart transporting goods over the Russian border into Galicia to the nearest town of Sasov around 1830. According to the story, he smuggled silver thread in his pockets taken from his father's workshop in Berezin. He quickly built a loom and proceeded to make aturas in Sasov, the location of the earliest known samples of Shpanyer Arbet. Of course, it's highly unusual and unlikely for a textile technique to have a specific origin date. What's more, the story carries the seeds of its own illegitimacy embedded within it. Why would Margulis have carried silver thread from his father's workshop and begun making etudes so quickly if he didn't already know how to make Shpanyer Arbet? In any case, it is a rather delightful aspect of Shpanyer Arbet that it comes with its own very Ashkenazi narrative. Despite the doubtfulness of the story as related to Shpanyer Arbet's beginnings, Margulis was in fact a real person, and he went on to create a workshop and maintained an actual monopoly over the business of handmade etudes for decades during the industry's peak between 1860 and 1890. Beyond the city of Sasov, at the beginning of the 20th century, branches of the factory were also in operation in Lviv, which was also a lace production center in then Austria-Hungary and what is today, of course, Ukraine. He maintained his monopoly for so long by keeping the source of his metal thread a trade secret. Initially, Margulis obtained his thread by smuggling it in from Russia, and later on, he sourced his materials from Weissenberg, Germany, and Vienna and Pressburg, Austria. In addition to etudes, the Sasov factory also produced collars for kitlin, which are a long white robe worn on the holidays and sometimes used as a burial shroud, sterntichels, kippas, and brustuches, which is a bodice piece worn tucked into the chest of a woman's dress, as I mentioned, for modesty, and it was used primarily in the 19th century. The image here shows a woman wearing a brustucha and what they would have looked like, and you can see that here right in the center. The business specialized in Shpanyer Arbet, and in order to produce etudes, Margulis maintained a connection with a talus company in Kolomia, which was the center of craft in eastern Galicia, to which he sent the etude pieces to be attached to woolen or silk talisim. His factories sold Shpanyer Arbet throughout Eastern and Central Europe, as well as North America. Shpanyer's Yiddish name, which carries the dual meaning of both spun work and Spanish work, has been a cause for speculation as to its origins. Recent scholarship reports conflicting information about where and when the technique was first produced, none of whom notably believe it began with Margulis. Some suggest the original home of Shpanyer Arbet is Spain, having been developed by 15th century Jews, who later brought the technique to Eastern Galicia during the expulsion and migration from Spain. Throughout available scholarship, however, it is more frequently reported as having developed in Eastern Galicia much later. Bonnie-Dara Michaels at Yeshiva University Museum in New York writes that Shpanyer Arbet is believed to have originated in Poland around the 18th century. Piotr Kotny, a journalist writing on the status of Jewish crafts in Poland in the 1930s, attributes the birth of this technique and the quote-unquote etude loom to Berezin, while writing that by the 19th century, that workshop no longer existed. Okay, historical use and creation. There are a number of potential production centers in addition to Sasov in the early years of Shpanyer Arbet. Pedartsi, Olesko, Horodishcha, and Radovliv. Sasov was possibly the production center only later on in the second half of the 19th and early 20th century. Scholarship has also noted that it was manufactured in Ukraine in Berezin in the mid-1800s. Shpanyer production peaked from 1860 to 1890, as I said, though examples from the preceding decades of the 19th century have been identified as coming from the Pale of Settlement, likely the towns of Berezin and Radovliv in modern-day Ukraine. Shpanyer Arbet is thus uniquely Ashkenazi and simultaneously carries strong connections with Ukrainian culture. Typical items produced during the 19th and early 20th centuries include sterntichels, which can be seen on the second line of this image here, brustuches on the third line here, kippot seen up here on the first line, and talisim, which are not shown. Designs. So the lace maker works from a pattern, which was historically designed and drawn by a different worker, not the lace maker, specialized in this skill. In Sasov during the 19th century, students in the local yeshiva and both men and women of the community historically drew patterns for the Shpanyer machers or Shpanyer makers. The most popular designs were liske, which are fish scales, Mogen David, Star of David, menorahs, rosettes, stars, herzlech or hearts, drei Schlangen, 3 snakes, Kriegel, a jug, Eigel, an eye, Blättel, a leaf, and Keppel, a head. Historically, certain symbols were used to show affiliation with specific groups. Within the Hasidic community, the Belz Hasidim were associated with the Keppel motif, whereas Kamarno Hasids often wore the Liskin. Those affiliated with the newly formed Zionist movement preferred the Magen David. Sasov itself was associated with motifs incorporating the Herzlich, Drei Schlangen, Kriegel, Eigel, Blättel, and Keppel. Here, I've identified a few of the many historic symbols and zoomed in on the photo for a better look. On the left, we can see the rosette. In the center, Blättlich, which are leaves, plural, and the Magen David on the right. And here is Rabbi Grunwald showing off some of his own designs on paper. So by the mid-1930s, Shpanyer Arbet production had declined dramatically. The decline in popularity is attributed both to increasing production costs and changing styles. In 1932, Sasov was cited as the only production hub of Shpanyer Arbet, which is notably well before World War II. Little is formally known about the status of Shpanyer Arbet production between World War II and its resurgence in the late 1900s in public markets and scholarship. Okay, contemporary use. The use of Shpanyer Arbet, as I said, has declined since its peak in the 19th century, and is now almost exclusively purchased by Hasidic Jews, and they do so in 2 locations, Brooklyn, New York, and the state of Israel writ large. Shpanyer is made primarily to adorn a turis. Use of Shpanyer on other items like kippot or sterntichels has ceased. As we are about to see in the next few slides, usage has changed from signaling group membership with different Shpanyer designs to a use, non-use signal on the talus, indicating group membership of Hasidic or non-Hasidic, as well as in-group differentiation of handmade versus industrial. Handmade Shpanyer Arbet is rare, and there are only a few craftsmen globally with the knowledge to make it. One of them is Rabbi Yosef Grunwald, who lives in Ashdod and has been featured in this presentation. And the other is Rabbi David Farkas in upstate New York. Both the process of creating Shpanyer Arbet and of sourcing proper materials remain protected trade secrets known to very few. For example, even Rabbi Grunwald's own teacher would not tell him where she sourced her materials. Other makers include anonymous craftsmen who may have done it for a short while but did not make a name for themselves, as did Grunwald and Farkas, and assistants such as those Rabbi Grunwald works with. In recent decades, more attention has been paid to reviving the technique and sharing it outside the Orthodox community as a way to access ancestral craftsmanship. I will not be getting into that today, but it poses an interesting question of who owns communal heritage, given the difficulty non-Hasids have had in accessing the technique at all due to the gatekeeping, as well as the tension between practical and aesthetic-oriented use. Mass production of imitation Shpanyer Arbet has greatly affected the prevalence of the handmade versions and their aesthetics. In a parallel to historic protection of the source of one's threads, machine-made imitation Shpanyer Arbet is now treated as the dominant commodity on the market. And as such, any information about its production, even the name of the factories producing it overseas, is protected as a trade secret and is not shared by the Judaica stores that sell them. It was quite difficult for me to do an analysis of the market past a certain depth, as I was utterly blocked from obtaining even small amounts of information. It is therefore not known exactly when in the 20th century mass production of Shpanyer Arbet acturas began, or whether it reached North America and Israel at different times or simultaneously. Upon introduction of mechanized work, handmade Shpanyer Arbet, which previously had been under pressure to be made quickly and cheaply, became a specialized commodity. Free from obligation to provide cheaper options, practitioners could afford to spend more time with each piece and created higher quality, more durable work with smaller gauge thread and more intricate stitching, which they then priced higher to account for the additional silver and labor involved. Alternatively, makers could instead opt for a reduced density of design, which reduces cost by minimizing both material and labor, but maintains the quality of the stitch work. This creates a lighter weight swatches that are more pleasant to wear over long periods of time. Here are two examples, one of reduced density on the left and one of thicker gauge on the right. And I apologize that the photos are not ideal. Both are high quality. And each piece in the US could easily go for $1,000 to $4,000 each. Machine-made Shpanyer Arbet is widely available on the modern market, and it costs a fraction of the price at around $100 US dollars in 2022, on average. Some may opt for the less expensive machine-made Shpanyer Arbet, purchasing new designs more frequently, as many of us choose to do with fast fashion clothing. However, this machine-made quote-unquote lace is less durable and requires cleaning more frequently. How much the Atorta costs depends on the purity of the silver. Today, Shpanyer Arbet is produced and purchased both online and in stores, marketed frequently as geflochten, meaning braided, or aturis, referencing the end product rather than the technique itself. If we look at the example here on the left, the border shows a clear comparison to blättlich, or the leaf pattern, as do the metal tape laid out in very visible strips resemble the original Shpanyer Arbet craftsmanship. However, the complexity is not the same as handmade, and the stitching does not wind in and around itself as the original does. This particular example bears an unusually close resemblance to the original. The right two samples are quite typical of the modern market. From a distance, they offer a similar silver band across the collar of the tallis. Up close, the repetitive squares reveal a friendliness to machines. Each square is attached to the others with a small ring, allowing the piece to move quite flexibly with the wearer. These two examples look exceedingly similar in style, but vary significantly in price, indicating that the example on the right contains more silver and will likely last longer. The example on the right has an additional design of a raised center within the squares and some further raised lines and decoration. Handmade Shpanyer Arbet is now reserved for rabbis or as markers of distinction, often gifts, possibly collectively purchased by multiple people due to the high cost. So I went to a workshop in Bnei Brak to understand more about how Shpanyer Arbet is used. I came in on a day in which they had an industrially made piece rather than a handmade piece, and a quick look through the process reveals a lot about how the lacework is constructed and attached to the talit and how industrially made pieces differ. The metal lace is first removed from its cloth backing and then dipped in hot water and dried with compressed air. This step is repeated as necessary, and the piece is then tumble washed with a cleaning solution and metal beads. There's a small video. Okay. Afterwards, it is rinsed, dried, and polished using a bristle brush and steamed. In the final step, the piece is dipped in a liquid polish and hung to air dry at room temperature. Eventually, the piece is brought back to a tailor for reattachment to its cloth backing. Handmade works require cleaning approximately every 5 years and mass-produced pieces every other year. And I have maybe a short amount of time. I want to show you little clips from these videos just so you can get a feel for what the industrially made pieces look like when they move and a little bit about the polishing. Let me turn off. So here you can see that she's using her hands, and you can see the way it moves, that there are links in the chain, and that they're all little individual squares. And here she lays it out, and she's doing some cleaning. In the center video, he's going to put some wax on the bristles, and then he holds it up and polishes it. And he told me that with a handmade piece, he would be much more gentle with it. He would do a very similar process, but he would be much more gentle because, of course, it's much more of a complicated enmeshment. And then finally, the dipping in liquid polish and air drying, just so you can see what it looks like. She dips it in and then hangs it up to dry. Oh, okay. I have a few questions here laid out for further research, such as when did the transition from broad Ashkenazi use to primarily Hasidic use actually occur, and what were the driving factors? When industrial production of Shpanyer Arbet began and how it affects palace aesthetics or the Shpanyer Arbet market. What the market actually looks like now, how many people buy it, and how does it divide between the handmade and industrially produced imitations? And also, how are non-Hasidic craftsmen using available information about Shpanyer Arbet, and for what purposes? Should information about Shpanyer Arbet remain proprietary to modern day makers, or should it be shared within the broader community? So here's my bibliography, and that's it.
It's a pity that we have this hybrid format, because you can't hear all the applause from the audience, and it goes to all presenters from today. But you can imagine this very nice sound. Thank you very much, Ms. Elena, for your presentation, and it's fascinating, and I really appreciating that you showed us these pieces of video, because it gives like real impression of how these pieces of art are made. And yeah, Sergey here shared in chat a link to the presentation from Natalia Levkovich, from Ukrainian researcher, about the Southeast Center of Jewish lace making. I'm sure Elena knows this article, but it also could be interesting for all other participants. And we have the last presentation for our panel from Ms. Ruth Gruber, and from the Jewish Heritage Europe, and I would like to give you floor and invite you to present.
Okay, I'm going to want to share the screen.
Just a minute, we will organize it.
Okay.
It's right.
You can try.
Can I try it?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Wait a second. I've got to allow Zoom to, yeah, okay. Just a second. It's asking me for. Didn't share it. They want me to quit Zoom and reopen. I don't understand why it's not letting me share the screen. Hang on a second. Hang on a second. Okay, no, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Everything okay? Full screen? Okay, great. It was asking me various questions that I don't know why. Okay, hi, thank you. I'm glad to be here, at least by Zoom. Sorry I can't be there in person, but hopefully someday. I'm going to speak today about a project I started around 15 years ago. I described it as, quote, an interdisciplinary fusion of visual documentation, reportage, reflection, and memoir. At its heart were my photographs of the gravestones of women in parts of Eastern Europe, specifically of those that feature often elaborately carved depictions of candlesticks, which are often accompanied by images of a woman's hands blessing the flames, like you can see in this first picture. Candles and candlesticks are a common and potent symbol on the gravestones of Jewish women. Lighting the Sabbath candles is one of the 3 so-called women's commandments to be carried out by female Jews. It is the only one easily represented in visual form. The others include observing the laws of Nida, separating men from women during their menstrual periods, and that of challah, or burning a piece of dough when making bread. A primary aim of my project was simply to photograph the gravestones and present their carvings as examples of art, but also to show the many ways in which candlesticks are portrayed. But I also sought to combine the images with historical research, personal reflection, and memoir in a way that reflected my own interpretation of the power of the physical imagery, supplemented by anecdotes, literary references, and personal stories. As a Jewish woman who has almost never lit the Sabbath candles in my home, I could also not fail to consider what the candlestick's representation means or what it meant. And one of the questions I wanted to explore was indeed the symbolic representation of all women as the lighters of candles, and by extension, the bearers of light. Candlesticks, in a way, candlesticks on tombstones, often form a schematic shorthand denoting both gender and Jewishness. Even today, they may be placed sometimes on the grave markers of women who had little to do with traditional Jewish observance. My own mother, for example, who died in 2007, is buried in a municipal, not a Jewish cemetery in California. She was an artist, and she possessed a strong Jewish identity, but I don't recall ever seeing her light the candles on a Friday night. Nonetheless, the flat metal plaque marking her grave includes the representation of candles, in her case, a 7-branched menorah. And I find it interesting that a self-portrait she painted when she was in her 50s prominently featured a pair of Shabbos candles. You can see it here. It's not my favorite painting that she did, but it shows the Shabbos candles, showing how important they were for her and her memory. I carried out most of the work on my candlesticks project from 2009 to 2011, but I plan to add to it later this month in Romania, northern Romania. Initially, my primary focus was the Jewish cemetery in Rădăuț, Romania, just south of Chernivtsi, where my own great-grandmother and great-great-grandmother are buried, as well as the Jewish cemeteries in several other towns nearby in Bukovina. I carried out field work there in cemeteries and eventually also in other cemeteries and other countries, including Ukraine. Rădăuț is where I first saw a Jewish woman's gravestone marked with candlesticks. This was in December 1978, deep in the Ceausescu era. I was on a journalistic assignment to accompany the chief rabbi, Moses Rosen, on his annual Hanukkah tour around the country. My brother Sam, who you heard earlier, came along too. Rădăuț was one of our stops, and there we found the grave of our father's grandmother, Ethel. She died in 1946, and I was given my middle name, Ellen, in her honor. As you can see in the photo, the gravestone was so discolored that it was hard to make out the 5-branch candelabrum at the top. I know at the time I didn't pay it any heed. The carvings on Jewish gravestones in Eastern Europe are marvelous, but often overlooked examples of Jewish art and artistry that combine personal symbolism, religious iconography, and folk styles. Interest in this artistry didn't really begin emerging until the early 20th century. In their talks, Sam mentioned researchers in Poland, and Yevgeny noted the works of researchers in Ukraine in the 1920s, such as Danilo Sherbakivsky. But the carvings also captivated others, outsiders. Here's one example, an illustrated book about them, published in Berlin in 1923 by Rabbi Arthur Levy, who wrote it based on his observations when a field rabbi in Eastern Europe in World War I. Among other things, he marveled at whole fields of gravestones bearing candlestick carvings. Oops, that's it. A decade later, the American writer Marvin Lowenthal waxed lyrical about East European Jewish cemeteries in his 1933 Jewish travel book, A World Passed By. Best known and most accessible now in the West is probably the Soviet-era work of David Goberman, who began documenting Jewish gravestones in what is now Belarus, Western Ukraine, and Moldova in the late 1930s and carried on for decades. His photos were exhibited and published to acclaim in the United States around or nearly 25 years ago. Most of the Jewish gravestones in Eastern Europe were almost certainly destroyed during World War II or under communism. Several more recent authors have written and published photographic and other works on surviving stones, not to mention there are now photo collections and databases on the internet, and of course, continuing in-depth on-site scholarly documentation and research. In the parts of northern Romania, Poland, and Western Ukraine that I was focusing my project on, as well as in nearby areas, the carved designs on Jewish gravestones became exceptionally ornate, particularly from the 17th and 18th centuries. The ornate style continued through the 19th and even into the 20th century in some places, although by the late 19th century, unique hand carving could be replaced by more standardized, though often still elaborate, templates. Much of the carved imagery on the stones was also found in other Jewish decorative art. For example, in the paintings that adorn the now destroyed wooden synagogues, in the elaborately carved, painted Torah arcs, and as we've just seen on the ark curtains, or in Jewish paper cuts. The earliest women's gravestones bearing candlesticks that I have found documented date from the late 18th and very early 19th centuries. Most women's tombstones before and around this period seem not to have had this special female iconographic marker. By the mid to late 19th century, however, and particularly by the latter part of that century, the candlestick imagery was almost universal, or at least very widespread in parts of Eastern Europe, though other symbols such as birds and flowers could also be used, especially to denote young unmarried women or girls. Here's one from 1921. You can see this gravestone behind the gravestone with the flowers there behind the candlestick gravestone, and it's a young woman who died barely 23 years old. This is in the Jewish cemetery in Radautz. Candlesticks on women's gravestones come in many types, styles, and degrees of ornamentation. As Goberman put it, considering all the variations would, quote, make an interesting study in itself. But few of the publications and research that I've seen go into this specifically female dimension at any length. One of my aims, thus, was to show these variations visually. The depictions of candlesticks range from what I would call classic Shabbos candles, 2 or sometimes more matched candles in individual candle holders, to multi-branched candelabra of various types, with various numbers of branches and various symbolic profiles and ornamentation. Some are just crude outlines, even just scratches. Many are elaborately ornamental, but still look like physical objects. Some clearly combine the imagery of the menorah with that of the tree of life, where the candelabrum sprouts leaves and shoots, or its branches turn into tendrils. Some are intricate figures that entwine the branches of the candelabrum and or its base into fanciful convoluted forms. In their 2002 book, Traditional Jewish Paper Cuts, An Inner World of Art and Symbol, Joseph and Yehudit Shadur write that the intricately convoluted menorah forms appear almost exclusively in 2 places, in traditional East European Jewish paper cuts and East European Jewish tombstones. But I have to say that I saw one example of the convoluted menorah just now on Anna's speech about Torah art curtains. These forms appear to represent a development of what's called the endless knot motif. The metamorphosis of the traditional menorah into the convoluted endless knot configurations appearing in the paper cuts, the Shadurs write, coincides with the spread and growing popularization of Messianic mysticism and the Kabbalah throughout the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe from the early 18th century on. Candles also may be treated as symbols of death. In many instances, broken candles or flames being extinguished represent the ending of life. Animals, birds, flowers, and other designs often embellish the design. And in northern Romania and parts of Ukraine in particular, many tombstones bear the depictions of a woman's hands blessing the flames, as you could see in the first picture I showed. 2 publications from the early 1990s, both written by women, elaborated on candlestick symbolism and typology. And I'd like to quote from both of them. In her 1993 book, A Tribe of Stones, Jewish Cemeteries in Poland, Monika Krajewska poetically described the wide variety of candlestick typology. She described elaborate death metaphors, such as, quote, an eagle shown extinguishing candles with its claws, or a griffin putting out a flame with its beak. One rare image she found was that of candles in candlesticks, some broken and others not, at the center of the relief, while on one or two sides, hands held new candles and seemed to be lighting them from the old ones, possibly alluding to the handing down of tradition or of transmitting life itself. And she described what she called unusual forms, like a 5-branched candelabrum made of snakes, or ones with branches that end with birds' heads, oak leaves, or imaginary fish with lions' heads. The foot of the candlestick may also take various shapes, such as an anchor or griffin's heads, she wrote. Candelabra made of floral ornaments derived from the mystical concept of the menorah as a tree of life. Even though, she added as a caveat, the stone masons who rendered such carvings might not have been aware of the association. In a 1992 essay called Visual Motifs in the Decoration of Tombstones in Ukraine, Ariela Amar expounded on the possible symbolism of candlesticks that goes well beyond their reference to the women's role of lighting them on Shabbat. She noted that in some depictions, the candles have flames that all lean toward the center flame. This, she wrote, is a direct reference to the traditional description of the flames of the menorah in the temple recorded by Rashi, and also appears on the painted walls of contemporary East European synagogues. She noted that the menorah appearing as a plant or a tree is quite familiar in Jewish iconography. And she wrote that in some depictions, quote, the candelabra are significantly formed by vines. In many cases, it is difficult to decide if the primary motif is a menorah or floral decoration. As a well-known utensil of the Holy Temple, she wrote, the menorah emphasizes not only the past, but also the yearning for the future rebuilding of the temple. The tree of life, which will be planted next to the temple in the Messianic days, commonly symbolizes eternal life. But like Monika Krajewska, she too added a caveat to all this, noting that floral and bird motifs also appear in non-Jewish folklore in Ukraine and may therefore be intended purely as decorative elements. What I want to do now is to show some examples of candlesticks on stone so that you can visualize these interpretations. This first image is what we've been looking at. It's a gravestone in the Old Jewish Cemetery in Suceava, Romania, that demonstrates several examples of the typology. The flames are pointing to the center. The candlesticks is merging, the menorah is merging into a plant. It looks like the flames are growing out of this tree of life, this plant. And griffins, the imaginary beast, the griffin, is anchoring the base. In this stone from Romania, Guru Humorului, it's clearly a tree of life. The menorah is such a tree of life that you can't really tell if it's a plant or a candelabra. It's a crude carving, but very ornate in its form and very symbolic in what it's saying. And of course, the blessing hands are above it. These two stones from the Jewish cemetery in Botoșani, Romania, very clearly show merging of the menorah, the candlestick, with the eternal life. And one of them, they're obviously from the same workshop. And Botoșani had a fantastic gravestone workshop where it produced carvings that approach the Art Deco in form. So one of them, the one on the right, you can see has the blessing hands also, but you can really clearly see this eternal knot at the base. It's not a tree of life, it's the eternal knot. Here's some braided candles, which also probably evoke the eternal knot, but some of them also are braided candles with elements of the tree of life. This one on the right from Guru Humorului shows the blessing hands candles, but you can see the leaves coming out of that, the bottom of it. And it's also anchored by a bird at the bottom. I like these two from Busk in Ukraine because they show the menorah, clearly showing the menorah growing out of the tree of life, or the candelabra growing out of the tree of life. But to me, it looks like the flames themselves are forming the eternal knot. On both of them, you can see above the flames, this configuration, this convoluted configuration. One is from 1867, one's from 1903, but they're very similar in form. And now the next few are sort of gravestones that actually evoke Shabbos. And this one here is one that I like very much, from Bolechev in Ukraine, from this Esther, daughter of Meshulam Zalman, who died in 1835. You can see almost the Shabbos table. The candlesticks look, they're not a menorah, they're not convoluted, but they look like classic candlesticks, which we still might have in our homes today. And they're grapevines, which I would assume could represent the Kiddush wine. And it looks to me like that thing in the center is a tray with challah on it. And so it would show the Shabbos table. Whoops, why am I not? These two candlesticks, one from Sadhora, that's two candlesticks, these two tombstones, one from Sadhora and one from Chernivtsi, also evoke the Shabbos because they have the same sort of Shabbos candlesticks, two small ones here, and on the right, two classic candlesticks like we saw on the gravestone from Bolechev. But it also has a death motif of the hand of God plucking the flower. And that is like the broken candles, or in mainly male tombs, the hand of God breaking the tree of life. This is a common death metaphor. Another much more elaborate evocation of Shabbos was found in Levy's 1923 book, and then it was interpreted in his own book by Marvin Lowenthal. It's a gravestone from 1906 in Horodica. I imagine the Polish village, not the town near in Ukraine. And it shows a woman's gravestone from 1906, which shows the entire Shabbos table with candlesticks and challah, and with the deceased, who's represented by a bird holding a prayer book. Levy says it's open to a verse from Proverbs, reading, "She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of love is on her tongue," but it's very hard to make out. And then Marvin Lowenthal interpreted it even further, very poetically again. There are 5 sockets in the candlestick, only 2 of which are lit with candles. Sarah Traina, mother of 5 children, of whom 2 survive, has left a vacant chair, but her spirit still grazes the blessing which ushers in the Sabbath. And I put this picture because these in Falticen, Romania, are very similar looking to the strange sort of looking candelabrum in Levy's illustration. Very simple, very different from what we've seen before. Here are just a few very simple scratches that indicate the candlesticks. One, a rather modern grave on the left from Rada Utz from 1990, which also, is modern and includes a photograph of the deceased woman. In the center from Shaharad, 1970, communist era, Soviet times, also with a very interesting, but very lightly, sort of like an outline of a candelabra. And here in Gura, it's just like scratches, but it has the rather unusual also decoration of the Star of David, and that one's from 1917. Here, on the other hand, is an extremely ornate matzeva for a woman. You can see the candlesticks, but it's almost very hard to see them because it's so ornate with its plant motif and all of that, and the griffins on top. That's also in Gura Humorule. now I want to get into for this last section, just some of the hands blessing the candles. And this, if anybody can help me on this or suggest things, the hands on the candles are arranged sort of backwards or upside down. When a woman blesses the candles, she, she has her palms facing her generally, and wafting the flames and the spirit toward her, and then sometimes covers her eyes. So the thumbs should be up. But in almost every depiction on these gravestones, the thumbs are down and the palms are facing out. So they're very similar in a way to these, which are male gravestones with the hands of the Cohen. So these are gravestones of Kohanim, and they're often marked with depictions of the hands giving the blessing of the Cohen. But so the palms are out, the thumbs are joined. I've seen one picture in Goberman where the hands on a woman's tomb are depicted in the correct orientation, but all the others, you can see here in this one from Suchava on the right, it's another tree of life. And again, the flames are, sort of bending toward the center, but it's clearly her hands are up, not looking toward her eyes. It's interesting. It could, I don't know. I'd be very interested in suggestions or is there some other ritual? I don't know. But you see here some others on the left. Here, just a few more. On the one on the right, it looks to me, this is another death motif. It looks to me like the birds are extinguishing the central flame. In this one, it's the convoluted candelabra, the flames leaning toward the center, but it looks to me like the birds are extinguishing the flames. Here, just another few, just to show, and I showed before how the gravestones used to be painted, and some gravestones that you find now still have traces of the paint on it, like this from Roman. And this here, in this from Roman, the hands are not emphasized, they're down into corners. And you have lions rather than griffins, which I think is interesting. Next to it, it looks like birds. Here too in Radautz, which one shows on the left, it looks to me like it's a carved stone, but the one on the right is clearly done from a template. In this section of the cemetery, there are many, many gravestones of women that have the same pattern, clearly carved from a template. And I'll just close with this shot because it's also from Radautz, but I have to close with this because the central gravestone also with its decoration carved from an elaborate template with the hands and the geometrically sort of convoluted candelabra is the grave of my great-great-grandmother. That is my grandmother's grandmother, who died in 1904. If you want, this project resulted in a website and blog, and it's still up there, even though it's pretty dormant at the moment. But there's a lot of more commentary and discussion with people and talking about the stonecutters' art and things like that. And that's the URL down at the bottom. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ilan, Ruth, for your presentation. I saw that major of our participants here in our conference hall and online has these exercises with their hands. So a bit of practical approaches also. We have air raid alert here in Ukraine, but nevertheless, we continue our panel and our conference. I thank you all presenters for all your fascinating topics and talks and all that you have shown us. And now we can move to the questions and remarks and other many things from our listeners. So please, you may write to the chat or just please turn on your mic and have some. Yes, and Miriam. Yeah.
Hi. Did you allow me to speak? Okay. Hello.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this wonderful conference. I have two questions, comments, one for Ruth and one for Elena. So I'll start with Ruth. Thank you very much. This was really a very moving presentation with also connections to your family. I just had an idea while you were talking about the hands. That actually, if you look at the tombstone, you cannot think about as that you're looking at a painting. I think that what is meant that you're looking at a deceased woman. And if she's looking towards you, then she's doing this movement and you are standing on the other side and seeing her palms. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not that as that you are standing behind her back and looking at her movement of blessing, but that she's facing you and you are on the other side of the tombstone looking at her. And therefore you see her palms.
But it wouldn't be her palms, it would be the back of her hands. That's what I'm saying.
No, no, you're looking towards her. Imagine that she's facing you. She's facing you. Candles are between you and her.
And you go like
you're
that.
Seeing then. Yes, but you're seeing her palms then. You're standing.
You don't see her palms. No,
you
you don't see her palms because when you bless the candles, you see your palms.
No, you don't imagine yourself. You're imagining her looking. Imagine that there are two women, okay, looking at each other.
Yeah.
And then there are candles in between.
Right.
Okay.
And you see the back of the hand of the person who's blessed.
You're on the other side of the candles.
The thumbs are down, not up.
Thumbs are.
Think about the thumbs, Miriam. Like even if you're right now on the other side of me, but my thumbs are still here. They're not here.
I'm sorry. Like that. Sit down. Here, look at my thumbs now.
But have you ever blessed candles like this?
Oh, please, not all at the same time.
All right, just the thought. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, I am, but I'm trying to say that she's not. That she's standing on the other side with two different worlds, and I just came to the idea because if you look at the Christian paintings or Christ crucified, you then see him not as a painted image, but from your world, and he's viewing at you from his world. So that's what I thought that this can be the same idea behind. That's one comment. Maybe I'm wrong. Now the other question is: are there any other symbols aside from the candles that you saw? Because, for instance, there is also a symbol of tzedakah, of like a hand putting a coin in a, and this is often also connected to for men or for women.
Yeah, for men. I mean, what I've seen. What I've seen, there's a lot of different symbols for men, and they've been written about extensively. And one is the tzedakah. I can show you many pictures.
Only for men, not for women.
Maybe for women too, but the ones I've seen are all for men.
Well,
for women, you see flowers, you see birds, you see the pluck of the flower.
And a broken tree, that's like a later sign.
The broken tree is usually men, but I think I've seen one for women. I've seen a broken tree for women in England, in Southampton, England. There's a broken tree for a woman. It's more modern. But that's all these other symbols are mainly for men, at least mainly for men. And the women in these places from the mid-19th century, I mean, beforehand there wasn't this overpowering, but it's extremely widespread from a certain period of time up to the present. And, you know, they were very elaborate. Today, they're not terribly elaborate, but generally, you don't see these male, like books or something. You see a lot of books on male tombs. You see the charity box. You see other forms, but I mean, you also see crowns, and there was a woman's grave also with crowns here, but the main motif seems to be, at least for this period of time, the candles, and these other ones for young women, flowers or birds, that type of thing, and the broken flower and things like that. But for I guess adult women is mainly the
Candles.
to which other things can be added.
Thank you. And for Elena, I have a question. How do you explain the use of the name Spaniard? Are there any explanations? Because you were kind of offering, you know, older interpretation that is connected to Spain and the newer ones that are not. But where the name comes from, if you know. And the other question is there a similar tradition or usage of such a handiwork in a Polish non-Jewish dress or head covers?
Is there use of, the question is there use of Shpanyer Arbet in a non-Jewish, but in Polish?
Yeah.
Yes, actually, that's a good question. There's a couple. Yeah, okay. So, good questions. I'll answer your first one first. So the reason that there are the two competing theories that I presented to you is because in Yiddish, the name has two equal meanings. Shpanyer means both spun and Spanish.
What is the first meaning? No, I didn't hear well.
Spun.
Spannen.
Right.
Okay.
So it can, but Shpanyer is like spun and Spanish. So people don't really know how the name came up. It could equally have been, you know, from a linguistic perspective, it could equally mean that it's Spanish in origin or that it's just spun because you saw the wooden bobbins around and around and around and around. Yeah. Now the theory, like a lot of, and I didn't go into it because this isn't like an art group specifically, but there's a lot of interesting, I spent quite a lot of time investigating that aspect of it. Did it come from Spain or did it come from Eastern Europe? And it matches a German, it most closely matches this German metallic lace called Lamespitze. And then a few other techniques because of various reasons, Puente de España, also Tali, and I don't remember where Tali is from. And I have pictures, but not at the moment. But I do think that it definitely comes from Europe and in the 17th century, and then that's like these other influences originated from it. My instinct at first was that it came from bobbin lace because it uses suspended bobbins and like it wraps around like bobbin lace does, but it actually resembles other techniques much more closely than it does bobbin lace. Your second question, did like non-Jewish Poles use it? And they're mostly no, but there some awareness of the technique did extend beyond the Jewish community. And like, for example, in 1887, a tourist from Sasov received an award at the International Exhibition in Vienna. So like that year, the Archduke Rudolph, who was at the time Crown Prince of Austria and I think later became many other things, he traveled to Sasov, and the technique there sparked such interest among his personnel that some purchased the aturas to take home with them as a testament to Jewish craft. So largely no, but the examples in which non-Jews engage with it is quite interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Vitaly heartlessly limited time for this session, question and answers. So I would like to ask all to limit your questions to one per person, and for the presenters to be very precise with your answers. Anna, I see your hand. Yes.
Thank you. Just a small comment while Miriam and Elena were speaking. I checked in the Index for Jewish Art about ounce boxes on female tombstones, and not checking everything, I found 5 that has ounce box for women, for female tombstone, and candlesticks simultaneously. But it's in all the cases I saw, it's in the oil, so it's kind of rabbinical ceremony. Just a comment. And I have questions for Elena. You have this list of production centers. How did you find any information about these production centers? How do you search for this? And do you see any advertisement for that center in newspapers?
The last part I didn't hear.
Like any advertisement for these production centers in Jewish newspapers or any other newspapers you saw? Just like
so, I didn't investigate. Thank you for your question. I didn't investigate newspapers for this particular research. I do know. How do I know that was like Stasov specifically is cited in many papers about Shpanyer Arbet specifically. In terms of the second center for I think, what did we say, Lviv was the other center for crafts. I don't remember. I'd have to look at my sources more specifically, and I don't want to waste people's time here right now, but I can maybe send it to you. But I don't remember why that was, or any information. However, some people in the chat have listed that there was a talk last year. I would love to also see the talk. It might be in Ukrainian, but that would be another great source to check out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sergey.
Thank you.
You're on mute.
Excuse me. I have a very short question or even comment to Professor Sergey Kravtsov. Do you have any testimonies about Soviet attitude to the Palestinian style? Why I ask this? It could be considered as a Zionist style, but I understand that it's maybe a bold conclusion because only 2 or maybe some more buildings were built in this style, but it was obviously for everybody obviously influenced by Middle Eastern architecture. And of course, it could be treated by Soviet authorities as a Zionist style. And when, as he showed, when we see that, when we saw that the building on the Stanislavov cemetery was not even damaged or any seriously damaged during the war, and it was destroyed, completely destroyed by the Soviet authorities immediately after the war. Maybe it was caused by considering, by treating of this style as a Zionist style by authorities.
Thank you for interesting questions. I tried to trace some attitude, Soviet attitude to the style, to these 2 projects. But I couldn't find anything. For me, it was also a discovery when I saw it in illustrated supplement to Hvila, and also it appeared recently on Facebook, and everybody started asking each other, "What is this? Have you ever seen this?" People who are not knowledgeable in this area, like Lada Moskovets and others, for me, it also was a surprise, but I saw it previously, but didn't connect these 2 projects in one piece, let's say, in one idea, in one phenomenon. I tried to trace. I wrote to my colleagues in Ivano-Frankivsk, to Reb Moshe Kolesnik, others, to people who are knowledgeable in local history. I traced also the Soviet history of Historia Mista Sil, of Ivano-Frankivsk area. Just they are very proud that they have a club finally. So there is no mention. Also, nobody remembers about the date when this burial house was actually destroyed in Stanislavy, Ivano-Frankivsk. In Broshnyevo Sada, there is a document which is copied to the Central Archives of History of Jewish People. So I know it's 1954, though I haven't arrived to the document proper.
Yeah, after Stalin's death. Yeah.
Pardon?
After Stalin's death, it was reconstructed. Synagogue in Broshnyevo Sada.
Yes, maybe there were some Jews after the war, by the way, who still worked as managers, because it is mentioned in Ukrainian nationalists' reports, by the way, that there are Jews working as supervisors. I believe they were the pre-war workers of this timber plant of Glesinger that became something, has another working name and probably still is working, but I don't know circumstances. I haven't arrived to these details. I'm sorry. Probably I have to go to the archives and get this decision of the Committee for the Cults or Religions in Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast. I don't know. Sorry, I haven't arrived to these details, and I would like very much to know if anybody knows when and for which reason the cemetery buildings in Stanislavy were raised. They definitely stood in 1944, as we see on this historical photograph.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So we still have time for 1 or 2 questions or remarks or another round of thanks for presenters. Maybe then I will use this opportunity. I saw Elena, yeah, and I would like to ask Anna about the. I'm not sure if it's you already talked about it, but still to clarify, how do you think those motifs, those ornaments, like schemes, how they were, how they transferred, how they traveled from region to region, how those motifs and decorative elements in the Torah Ark curtains, how the master who made them choose to use exclusively these elements while creating this Torah Ark curtain. Because today we know that like women or men who make this embroidery, they sharing schemes, like you can find them everywhere in the internet. But what about 19th century? Those plans of this embroidery was sharing.
If we speak about technical aspects, you know much better about Austro-Hungary, how it was done, because we see templates being sent on order. You can see that. That's actually also my question about advertisement. I was searching for advertisements, and I found quite a number in Austro-Hungary. Then all kind of companies offering to send a catalog, and I think artists could just copy. It's not necessarily one company. And when we speak about Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, I found advertisements of bookshops that are selling scrolls, these mantles or curtains. but no catalogs mentioned. But still, I think there was templates, and you could just, I think artists could just copy something that found that they saw is interesting or beautiful, compilate, you know, several elements they saw. So I know less about technical side in Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine, but I think it's still about templates and just copying from what you liked. Maybe.
Thank you. Yeah. And Elena, you also wanted
My
to ask?
question was also for Anna. It was a very similar question. So it it seems like the Torah mantles were created at about the same time as you know, industrialization was beginning. So I was going to ask you how industrialization came into play. It seems like the fact that there were booklets that you could copy from, there's a very strong influence of industrialization already, even if they weren't being mass produced. So I wanted to know if any of them were mass produced, and if there's like a way that you can tell. Usually when I'm in museums, like I think I can tell, but it's not always listed in the on the plaque. So I wanted to know, like, just what your thoughts were about the effects of industrialization on the craft as a whole.
Like the easy part about machine embroidery and embroidery is, meanwhile, I found like early 20th century machine embroidery only in US. But meanwhile, it's only just, it's one more time, it's something that based meanwhile only on ads and all kind of published material. Probably I should search better, but from what I saw, what was produced in Belarus and Lithuania and Ukraine, it's hand embroidery. But I think, for example, this influence of mass production, such it's not about technique in many cases, but for example, we can see objects, this bookshop selling clothes with Torah mantles that were made in advance. They don't have any personal inscriptions, no names or dates, but they all of a sudden have all kind of standard Bible quotes, and you can see they're coming, like they repeat themselves. So I think it's kind of influences industrialization, and like you like it's not industrialization, it's a ready-made thing. You make them before they were ordered and then sell them in shops. So I don't know if it's answering your questions, because I'm searching for all these technical details, and I really like your technical details from your presentation, but I'm still very far from finding what I would like to get.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think as the presenter, Dr. Sergey Kravtsov has the right for this bonus and last question for this panel.
Thank you. I have a question to Elena. I'm afraid it derives from my very poor knowledge of Yiddish, but you were using on parallel terms Sterntichel and Brusttichel. Actually, the root of both words is tuch, which is kerchief, something like that. But in one case, I suppose you are using a Litvakish or normal Yiddish, and in another case, you are using Galician pronunciation, like Sterntichel. Are you going to somehow normalize these things, or are these two different things, or do they just originate in different literary sources?
That's a good question. I wish my Yiddish tutor who was here, maybe he could answer, but I'll tell you from my perspective, I was actually just reading what was written in the text that I found, which is transliterated to English. So I used my knowledge of Yiddish pronunciation to pronounce the words, but I never saw them written in Hebrew. So I actually didn't notice that the root of the word was the
It's
same.
a German word, tuch. Tuch is a German word, like Russian galstuk.
Also, my Yiddish comes from Yivo in New York, who did the big project of universalizing dialect, which just means they made their own dialect that's separate from everyone else's. So I tend to pronounce things using their dialect, and I'm a little bit, I always want to know more about other dialects, but I don't. So it's possible that with the Yivo dialect, they use both pronunciations as well. I'm not sure. I'm only going based off of the transliteration, which I have in English. Although some of the authors are perhaps in the room, maybe you can ask them as well. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Another round of applause for all presenters. And that was really fascinating panel. Ms. Gruber, in the chat, you can find another theory about the hands deposition that also was a very nice practical a bit part of this panel. So thank you very